welcome to the Philly Factor. My name is Paul Perrello, and thanks so much for being with us here. Celebrating 41 years of being in the business of entertaining families, it is Sesame Place, located in Langhorne, Bucks County. I was there on the media preview day back in May 1980, introducing Sesame Place, Playground of the Future. My guest on our program is Guy Hutchinson, who is the author of Sesame Place. Guy, thanks so much for being with us here on the program.
Oh, I'm overjoyed. Anytime I can talk about Sesame Place, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, this was that little old theme park that a lot of people were a little reluctant about or a little nervous about because it was, at the time, located in the middle of nowhere. We're talking Langhorne, Bucks County. And geographically, it was between New York and Philadelphia.
Right.
But, what from your perspective, why Langhorne? I mean, they could have gone anywhere, but why Langhorne?
It was very specific. They narrowed down at the time when they built that. The idea was that they were going to build that one, and then the following year they were planning to build a second one and then a third one, and these were going to be across the country. They had an initial goal of building, I think, 14 of them. And so Langhorne, they looked at different areas where it would be perfectly located to get from different places. As you say, they said, well, we can get from New York, we can get from New Jersey, we'll triangulate this, and they picked Langhorne as the location. A lot of things happened that changed their plans going forward after that, but that was why they started with Langhorne.
It was a relationship, a partnership between Children's Television Workshop and Anheuser-Busch Entertainment. And a lot of people were saying, well, why would a beer company get involved with Children's Television Workshop? It just like there were polar opposites at that time.
Yeah, it's really interesting to look at because Sesame Street was only on the air for about a decade when they started working on the theme park, and they had plans to do a theme park really soon after that show took off. They had looked at doing one in Florida, and they had ideas to do bigger theme parks, and they ended up with this plan to do these small theme parks, which they started on. And Anheuser-Busch at the time, they did Busch Gardens, and they were very excited to get on board with the squeaky clean image of Sesame Street. So much so that when the park opened, Anheuser-Busch served beer at all their parks, and they didn't want beer at Sesame Place because they said, we'll be the ones everybody will blame for it. They said, at the time they said Children's Television Workshop was okay with it. They said, that's part of a theme park, we're fine with that. And they said, no, we don't want the image because it's only reflecting on us that it would be there. So, yeah.
The theme park, when it opened, and from what I remembered, on opening day, and even having talked to other media people that were there on opening day, it was, yes, a theme park, but it was a very different theme park than what we perhaps had been accustomed to, whether it was here in Pennsylvania or having traveled to Florida to one of the Disney parks or out to California. It was a theme park. It had rides, it had attractions, but it didn't necessarily have the thrill rides that we had come to expect, like at Hershey Park or Dorney Park. It was definitely catering to children and families of young children, and it looked like something totally different, something we were not familiar with or comfortable with, perhaps, in the beginning.
Yeah, it's interesting. When it opened, they wanted everything to be kid-powered, and they worked with a psychologist, and they worked very hard to try to make everything educational. Even the food that they served when they opened, it was all healthy food, and they had lots of unique ideas that were going to make this different than any other type of theme park. And again, this idea that it was going to be these small little play places that they were going to introduce. They wanted to do things very differently. They had computers, which in 1979, more people had outhouses than personal computers. And so Sesame Place, when it opened in 1980, they had the world's largest collection of computer games. Wow. It was really, and the idea of computer games today, we think of, well, that's, just playing a video game. But then they thought of it as, this is educational. Kids are going to get their hands on a computer. and this is a way to entice them to learn about, new technology. So yeah, everything was kid powered, and it was all kid powered for many years. It wasn't until they built the roller coaster that they had any ride that was a passive ride experience where you got on and enjoyed it. And they only had to do that because the park just kept expanding and got more and more successful. The interesting thing was they had a lot of this stuff that was almost like playground equipment when they first opened, and they anticipated that it would last a year. Well, the park was so popular when it first opened for many reasons. As you may remember, it opened very late. They had planned to open about a month or two earlier, and it was way behind schedule. But it was so popular, they got so many guests through the door that this equipment that was supposed to last a year was breaking down in a matter of months. And so they had to start looking at, well, our vision for this place has to change because the place is actually more successful than we wanted it to be, which is a good thing, of course. But they had anticipated people spending about 45 minutes on a visit there, and everybody was staying the whole day. They anticipated that it would be a place you would go to for part of a day, and people were getting there at opening and staying there until the end of the day.
A few things, and I want to talk about the menu because I remember distinctly that menu on the media preview day, and I remember saying to myself, and I think some of the friends I was there with, this isn't going to fly, because at that time, just like we are today, we are definitely a culture of fast food, and it's not necessarily Brussels sprouts or bean sprouts or whole grain rolls, right? Maybe we'll take the whole grain roll today, but I remember, and they, of course, what they do with the media is they didn't wine and dine us, but they did give us food to eat. But it was like I looked at the food and I'm like, I don't see how this is possibly going to work. But I also understood and appreciated what they were going for. It was a much different experience, a wholesome experience than you would see with typical theme park food at that time.
Yes,
but they changed the menu though.
Oh yes, they've changed. I mean, they've changed everything over time. But what's interesting, when it opened, they had this square meal pizza that was supposed to have, all of the nutrients that you would need. And I've heard from everybody I know that remembers going as an adult or a kid, tasted like cardboard. But the thing that's interesting to look at about the restaurant there, the Food Factory, when it opened, a lot of things about the early days of Sesame Place were so revolutionary that when you talk about them today, they don't sound that way because we've gotten used to these things. But at that time, when they built the restaurant, the Food Factory, they had exposed vents and pipes up above like you do when you go into a Walmart or any place like that. You see that today. But back then, that wasn't very common at all. And their idea was, we want to be able to let the kids see how businesses work, see how the ceiling works, how air conditioning goes through the ceiling. And they put up glass partitions so kids could watch the food being prepared. Now, today, if you go to Subway, you see them make your sandwich in front of you. But in 1980, that was not really common. And it was something that the Food Factory was an attraction. You saw people making pasta and doing things that kids had never witnessed before and were able to learn about. And they had facts on the wall with Big Bird, telling you about how this stuff is made.
Now, during our program here, we're going to be putting up photos that are included in Guy's book, Sesame Place. That one photo at the very beginning is from 1980, and it's an aerial shot that shows the plant or the footprint in Langhorne, Bucks County of Sesame Place. And we're only talking like 14 acres.
Yeah, It was very small. I think it was even smaller than that when they first opened. Yeah. And it was so small. And at the time, there wasn't a lot there. If you watch old videos from when it first opened, you can see houses in the background. I mean, that area next to the Oxford Valley Mall was not nearly as developed as it is today.
And there was no, at least from my recollection, no nearby hotel or hotels that if people, especially today, it's a given that you're going to go to a theme park like that and you want an overnight stay because the park is sort of offering like a 2-day visitor's pass or a 3-day pass. You need a place to stay. And so there were no hotels in that immediate area where a family could go and stay overnight and then go back to the park the next day.
Yeah, I think the Sheraton opened maybe 2 years after Sesame Place opened. That's right across the street. And yeah, there was not a lot. And what's interesting is now, if they could go back in time, the theme park would purchase so much more land. Now
Sure.
they're locked in by all these different things. And so the thought is, gee, wouldn't it be great if we could expand in that direction or this direction? Even if you look, there's a pond behind the park. The park built that pond. They dug that out and created that pond as part of their deal to build the theme park there.
Hmm. It's an interesting place. There are people, I think it's safe to say, up and down the East Coast that are descending upon Sesame Place, and so much so the success. And it's taken a while, but they have now incorporated some of the Sesame Street characters into other Anheuser-Busch theme
Yeah.
parks around the country. And correct me if I'm wrong, that they're actually, if they haven't already, are in the process of at least building. I mean, Sesame Place laid claim that there is no other place in the United States or the world where you could go and interact with the Sesame Street characters like you can at Sesame Place. But now, I guess, realizing the value of what they have there at Sesame Place, they are expanding that brand and opening other similar
Yeah,
experiences.
it came out in the news few years back now, because of the delay with everything, over 2020. It came out that when they renegotiated their deal, SeaWorld Parks and Entertainment, which now owns the park, wanted to build another one. They said, we'd like to build another one, and they are. It's going to be in San Diego. It's going to be right near the SeaWorld in San Diego. It's going to be built, from what I understand, where the Aquatica Park is that SeaWorld owns now. But they've also, built these Sesame Place type sections of, the SeaWorld parks, as well as the Busch Gardens Park. Busch Gardens Park has some really unique attractions, because not only are they Sesame Street themed, but they're also themed to some of the stuff that you see at Busch Gardens. So like there's a Loch Ness Monster type attraction that's themed to Sesame Street.
The attractions themselves actually changed over the years too. I mean, there was some of the things that you would expect at a children's theme park, like the net crawl or the ball pit. But I think anywhere you go today, if you want to call yourself a theme park, you got to have a water ride or two.
Oh, yeah.
And so they sort of, as they grew from 1980, they began to incorporate some of these other, what we would say are traditional theme park experiences into this otherwise groundbreaking theme park in Langhorne.
Yes. So when they first opened, Eric McMillan was the brains behind most of the attractions at the park. He was the designer of the actual attractions. He had invented the ball crawl, the concept of the plastic balls that people get into. He had invented that for SeaWorld, I think in 1976. And so that was really new. This was the first time there was a ball crawl anywhere near as big as it was, and it was huge. I mean, it was as big as a house that was anywhere on the East Coast. And that's one of those things that I always tell people. I'm like, look, I know you hear that today. That doesn't sound like that was interesting. It was a big deal back then. I mean, there were pictures when Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon visited. The first thing they wanted to do was get in the ball pit and and swim in balls. The concept of swimming in these plastic balls. But they also had the net climb. A lot of this stuff was Eric McMillan's ideas of taking things together that had been he had done at Ontario Place, which was a theme park that he had done in Canada. And they slowly started to change things. And the water attractions, very interesting. Water attractions, water slides used to be, you'd get on like a pad and you'd slide down a water slide. And I think the guy's name was Budge Brown out in California that owned a water park that came up with these slides that were this type of resin or plastic. And so you could shoot down them fast. And that took off in the late 70s. And so a woman named Sandy Hanna was working for Sesame Place, and her job was they would focus group a bunch of children and they'd show them ideas for attractions. So they'd show them pictures of things that you could do, science things, play things, and they'd see what the kids liked and what the parents liked. And that was not always the same. But she said every time they brought up something that had, an inner tube and water, the parents and the kids all said, ooh, and so they found that was something that parents and kids wanted to do and wanted to do together. So yeah, they had some of the first water slides on the East Coast were at Sesame Place.
Wow, fascinating. Your book is filled with these fantastic pictures from like day one, through the 2000s. And I got to ask you, what made you, or what prompted you to put this history together on Sesame Place?
Yeah, Chris Mercaldo wrote the book with me. And Chris had done another book for, I think, Adventureland Theme Park was the other book that he had done. And he was interested in doing one for Sesame Place. And he reached out to me just through a very strange circumstance. I had done a blog online. And the reason I had done the blog was when I was a kid, I went to Sesame Place, and then I grew out of it like everybody else does. Sure. And I still drove by it all the time. So I was always very curious what it was like, and I said, wonder what they're doing in there, but you didn't go, you were an adult, you didn't go. Then I had a kid and I took him there and I walked through and I said, well, where is this? And that's still here, but I remember it being over there, and I couldn't wrap my head around all of the stuff that was there. And I would be talking to my other friends and say, hey, remember when we used to go to Sesame Place? Do you remember this wall where I'd take a picture and your shadow would stay on the wall? And they'd say, I remember that. And so I started looking this stuff up, and there was no website that had this information. So I dug and I'd look at pictures and video. I even went to the library and I'd find this information and I'd send it to my buddies in emails, like, oh, look at this. This is great. When we go with the kids, we'll have to look at this. And my one friend said, why don't you just make a blog out of this? He said, if you're interested in this, there's got to be other people that are interested in it. And Chris is one of those people. Chris contacted me, was like, I'm super interested. I went there as a kid. I love the resource that you have. And let me give you these things that I remember, or this bit of information I found. And so it became this thing where I amassed a lot of people's memories and into a pretty well-documented history of the park. So when Chris wanted to do this book, he reached out to me, and I was overjoyed that the park wanted to do it. And they did not have a very substantial archive. They hadn't saved anything. They just moved forward. So when something closed, they may have written down the date, but that was about it. They tore it down, they threw it out, and they moved on to the new thing. And it wasn't until the time we started working on the book that they realized that they had such a history, that it had been so many years that they had been open, that this was something that generations now had been there, and it's good idea to document it and share it with people. And I do think that that's important, because Sesame Place is a place that parents took their kids there, and then those kids became parents, and then those kids even become grandparents. And there's these things where you're like, wow, my kid is having fun at the same place where I was. I remember that when I was a kid. And it's really something that really does bring a lot of people together.
The other thing is up here in the northeast portion of the country, where we typically have all four seasons. A park like Sesame Place, Dorney Park, Hershey Park, they would open in the spring, the summer, and then they would extend perhaps into the fall a little bit, into October. Sesame Place has managed to break out of that mold of just being a summer destination. Now they have extended the season through at least Halloween, and then they reopened at Christmas with special events, which is, I guess, it's smart, a smart business plan on their side. But I don't think, because geographically where we're located and where these parks are outdoors, that it will ever be a 365 days out of the year park. But I guess today in the competitive market of theme parks, they really have to see how they can expand and extend that season in order to pay the bills at the end of the year.
Yeah, and it also, there is the demand for it. I know one of the things with my kid, with when you have little kids that are the age of going to that theme park, they don't understand, it's closed. We can't go again for several months. And also with a lot of people with little kids, those big costume characters can be scary. And it is good, if they like them, that you continue to take them around those characters so they never get that gap of time where the next time they see Elmo, they're like, oh my God, he's gigantic and I'm terrified. And so those events that they would do, they would just start creeping out a little bit. They'd say, "Oh, we're going to have Big Bird's birthday. Is what is November 12th or whatever, and you can go there and have breakfast with Big Bird, and then you can go on the carousel. Which even if it's cold, you ride the carousel once. That's fun." And they started doing these events, and that led to their Christmas event. Which, if you ever get to see it, they completely change out so much of the park. It's remarkable. They turn a shop that's there, that's like a shop where you can buy flip-flops and toys and stuff right near the water area, is completely transformed into this whole Santa Claus area where you go through doors and there's a magic door to get to the room with Santa. And when I've looked at it, I can't even in my mind place where the footprint of the store is that was there a month earlier. So it is really neat what they do for their Christmas events and the other events that they do throughout the year. And they've really managed to extend that out. Now, there are other parks that they're going to be building in San Diego. They'll have the luxury of California weather.
Sure.
And the interesting thing, when they announced the one in San Diego, they started referring to the one here as Sesame Place, Philadelphia, which obviously it isn't, but it makes more sense if people, if you don't live anywhere near Sesame Place and they say Pennsylvania, you think maybe it's Pittsburgh area, you think, it could be anywhere. So at least that gives people an idea of that's where it is.
Yeah, and character interactions are so important, regardless of the theme park. But from my earliest recollection, it seemed to me that despite today, where character interactions seem to be very commonplace, Sesame seemed to be very much out in front of that, perhaps more so than some of the bigger parks that are out there today.
Yeah, they had it pretty early, and not only that, you may know that Walt Disney characters started speaking where they'd move their mouth if they're in a show.
Sure.
Just a few years back. I mean, I guess maybe it's close to 10 years or so at this point. But Sesame Place, the day they had characters, they had the characters talking and moving their mouths, which was, it made sense coming from a team of puppeteers that were working to help design these characters. They were known for puppetry. They were able to find a system. I believe it was a handbrake that the human would have, that they could squeeze to open and close the mouth, and a unique system that made these characters talk, and they could interact in a pretty great way. They could do a live show where they're singing and dancing. You're hearing Jim Henson's voice as Ernie, and then Ernie walks over and pat you on the head if you're a little kid. That's an amazing experience.
Sure. You mean to tell me, Guy, that the characters are there are people operating the characters? Or are you ruining this whole concept for me, Guy? I don't know how I will go on from this point.
Sorry, pretty convinced.
In the few minutes that we have left here, we can go on and talk till we're both blue in the face. But what's your fondest recollection of Sesame Place?
So when it opened, I was a little boy. I was, I think, 6 years old. And so I wanted to go so bad. And my parents said, no, it's too much money. We're not going to go over there. And so I'd see the commercials. And then when I finally got to go, I was a little older, which was probably great because my memory of it, I was probably 10 or 12, somewhere in that range. So my memory is a lot clearer. But what I remember so much about it was there was this wall where your shadow would stay on the wall, which you blew my mind. There was a thing where you could pedal and see electricity, and see how that worked. And that stuff all was so exciting to me. But obviously, as a parent, there was a moment I took my kid there and he had bought a basketball that he really liked. And Big Bird played basketball with him for about 5 minutes before we took a picture with Big Bird. And I cannot tell you how, just wonderful that was. So it really is a special place.
The name of the book again is Sesame Place: Images of Modern America. Is the actually it's Arcadia Publishing, but this is one of the books in the series, Images of Modern America. Some fascinating photos in there. It is really a trip down memory lane for all of us, and all of those characters that we grew up with and our kids grew up with are all included in the book. And Guy, I want to thank you so much for your time to talk about this book and something that's near and dear to your heart. And when people want to know more, where can they find Guy Hutchinson if they want to know more about what it is? Because you do a lot of different things, my friend. Where can they find you?
I'm on the internet. Everything's Guy Hutchinson. So if you go to guyhutchinson.com, Guy Hutchinson on Twitter, whatever it is, I'm out there. And I'd love to, if people have questions. A lot of times people will come to me with their photographs and send them to me. And it'll be something that I hadn't seen before and a new thing to archive. So absolutely, if you're out there and you want to reach out, please do.
All right, Guy, thanks so much for being with us. It was a long time coming getting the show together, but I'm glad that we finally had the chance to sit down and chat about Sesame Place.
Absolutely.
All right, Guy Hutchinson with us here on this edition of the Philly Factor. I want to thank Guy for being with us. Again, the name of his book is Sesame Place. You can find it online. Go to Guy's website to find out more about Guy. And until the next time, thanks so much for being with us. My name is Paul Perrello, and thanks for watching the Philly Factor.